admitting everyone in. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Please get yourself comfortable. If you could make sure to name yourself what you would like to be referred to, that is preferable. And that would hopefully be your name, but to each their own. Thank you so much for being here. We are here for our strategic fundraising panel. Huge thank you to our moderator and Israel Ride Vice Chair, David Eisenberg, who helped set this up and put this together. I am gonna put this in the chat, but if anyone has any tech issues, feel free to message me. If there are any questions that you have for our panelists, feel free to drop them in the chat or send them to me as well. And I am going to very happily hand things over to David Eisenberg. David Eisenberg, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. And I think Sarah mentioned that we're recording it. The reason we're recording it is we do frequently have questions from either new riders, prospective new riders, other people who are interested in looking on, well, I think I'd love to do the Israel Ride, but I worry about how would I raise the money. So while we have these four panelists together, we thought it would be good to capture their thoughts, their ideas that they're sharing with you, also your questions as we have time for them, and put that in the recording. So we'll be sharing it. I'd particularly like to thank Chuck, Lori, Lev, and Sharon for agreeing to be panelists tonight. They're all experienced riders. They've all done the ride multiple times, raised the funds multiple times. And what I really wanted to get tonight was a sense from each of them to share some of their strategies that have worked, what advice they'd have, et cetera. So before we get started, and I'll just go alphabetically by first name, maybe if each of you would just briefly introduce yourself, starting with Chuck.
Yeah, hi, Chuck O'Brien. I'm a complete outsider to Israel, complete outsider to the Jewish community. And coming up on my, is it 6th or 7th ride? So I've grown a very big heart for Israel and for the Israel Ride in particular, and train hard in the off season, and have had success year to year, evidently, because they let me keep coming. So I must raise enough money. So that's it for me.
Great, thank you. Lori?
Hi, I'm Lori Silverman, and I live in West Hartford, Connecticut, and Westerly, Rhode Island, and ride in both places. And aside from riding across Massachusetts for the Dana-Farber PMC ride for the 7th time this year, I'm looking forward to my 3rd in-person Israel ride. I've been in 2014 and 2018. And adapted to weather conditions and fundraising conditions and everything in between, and have fundraised for both rides and the balancing of that in time of year. So David thought it'd be good to weigh in on that piece of how do you balance it. And I did the virtual Israel ride a couple of years ago as well. So have enjoyed being a part. Yeah, have enjoyed being part of this community, and hope I have something to offer in regards to expertise.
Great, thank you. Lev?
Hi, everybody. So I'm Lev Herndson, coming to you from East Rockaway, New York, which is on the South Shore of Long Island. I started cycling in 2014 because a friend of mine who had done the Israel Ride said, hey, you're going to do this bicycle ride with me, and you're going to ride 365 miles and raise $10,000. And I said, you're crazy. And there was an expletive in there too. But a month later, I did end up buying a road bike, and I trained up and I rode for the first time in 2014. I've done the ride 4 times in person, 1 time virtually. So this will be my 5th or 6th time, depending on how you count. I don't love the fundraising part, but that's a necessary evil to contributing to this community. And if I can be of any help in that respect, well, you'll hear so. But I do really love coming back each time and seeing so many familiar faces and reconnecting with people. And of course, reconnecting with some of my most favorite hills in the world.
Your friends. That's good to hear. Sharon?
Hi, my name is Sharon Cohen. I'm coming from East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, in the western part of the state, kind of close to Lori because I saw her during my Passover shopping. I started the ride in 14, similar to Lev. My rabbi actually said to me, "You would love this. Let's do this together." And I've done it every year since 14, a couple of years virtually. My rabbi has never done it with me, but she has done it before, and she got me involved in the fundraising aspects as well. So it's been a great trip, and glad to be here to help you out if I can.
Good. Thank you very much. And I should have introduced myself at first. Most of what Sarah said is more than sufficient. I'm David Eisenberg, Vice Chair of the ride. Howie Rodenstein is also on the call as chair. I first heard about the ride when Howie told me about it in 2003, and have been privileged to be back on it, starting in 2005, and I think all but 1 year since then. So it's great to be part of it, and each year to figure out for my connections what's the best approach to raising the money for the ride and supporting the work that it supports. So with that as stage setting, I'll switch up the order a little bit just so it's not completely robotic. But Lev, would you mind taking a minute or two, a couple minutes to talk about what your approach is to fundraising for the ride?
Sure. So 99% of my fundraising is done via email, and I never call anybody. I do draft maybe a letter or two to like my insurance agent and the dry cleaner, but otherwise all via email. I keep a spreadsheet, which I'm careful to curate with everybody's first, last name, email address, etc. And I use that spreadsheet year after year, keeping track of what everybody's given. So if you want to take a longitudinal approach, for me, with respect to the emails that I send, probably the most important thing is short and sweet, and I always name a number. So for instance, if my goal every year is to raise $10,000, this might be the only year that I actually don't realize 10, we'll see. But normally I exceed that, and my goal typically is to raise 10. So I just figure I'm going to ask everybody for $100. So I can literally say in the email, if 100 of you each give me $100 tomorrow, I'm done. And I can concentrate all my efforts just on training up. And that's not with the expectation that people are going to give me 100, but by naming a number, it's sort of like going to a fancy restaurant. On the menu, the top item is always the most expensive, because you see the kosher steak is $69. And then all of a sudden, everything else looks cheaper. If you name a number, you're setting an expectation, and then it's up for them to decide how they want to give and if they want to give. That's worked well for me. The other two things I'll just mention is that I thank immediately. So like same day thanking them, and I thank them with a personalized email. I also thank them via Facebook. If I know they're on Facebook, and I use their name as a lever to then induce others to give with a picture and a link. And then the other thing is I do like to sort of steward them. So generally when we're on the road in Israel, I'll send an email each night, day 2 complete, with a little update about what we did. I don't know that anybody reads them, but I'm keeping them in the hopper. I'm sure there are lots of other things, so I'll leave it at that for the time being.
That's great. Thank you. Sharon?
Yeah, I do some of the same things that Lev does. I mean, I use email predominantly, but I email Jewish people, not Jewish people, business contacts, which I don't have a lot of because I'm self-employed. And I don't give a set amount. I do give them my entire goal, which I've been able to raise close to $10,000. So I sort of use that as my benchmark now. And I say anything, you want to give 36 to 360, sort of how I do it. And my most popular amount donated is $180. And I get some that are $10 and $15 too. So I don't give them an exact amount, but I give them a range. I email everybody when I send out my emails, even if they've given, I always say, thank you for those that have already given. And then I go on with my second pitch, third pitch, however many I do. Like I also use Facebook as a fundraising and thank you. I get a lot of people on fundraising. Sometimes I get friends, like childhood friends I went to Jewish day school with, will give, that I don't see and haven't had contact with in 40 years. So you never know what your outreach is going to be and how it's going to grow. And one advantage I think that we have as alum is if I have an alum friend who's not riding, sometimes they will give also. So some years I get them and some years I lose them because they're riding or they're not riding. But I try and keep it as wide a reach as possible. And I don't really cull it down too much. And after 3 or 4 years of people not giving, I maybe take them out. But I really try and keep a broad reach, and whatever I get, I get. And I thank them during the ride, after every donation.
Thank you. Chuck?
Sorry, I had to unmute.
That's okay.
Yeah. So I was first invited to the Israel ride by a writer, and he had a good record of fundraising. So I really kind of leaned heavily on him for the first couple of years. And that helped a lot because he was very connected to the Jewish community and fundraising, and I was not. After that, I'm a big advocate for people give to people. They don't give necessarily to organizations, not always to causes, but the people who give and support me on the Israel ride give because I'm doing something that I'm passionate about, that I think is extremely important, that I think makes a big impact on the region. And, you know, in an area where we as Americans have a very difficult time connecting, the Israel ride does something for Jordanians, for Palestinians, for Israelis, for other people who attend the Orabai Institute. That means a lot to me. The environmental issues in the area are extreme, and they're all extremely complicated, and they overlap from country to country to country. That makes sense to me. And when I ask people to support me, you know, I lay that out and then they support me. This last year, one of my big providers just laid out $2,500 for the ride. And I'm like, okay, seriously? Is that real?
That's
you know,
awesome.
but she really believed in me, and she believed in the cause. And hopefully, anytime anybody gives, I encourage them to come on the ride in the future. I think that's incredibly important. You know, it's enough for them to support me, but I think they really need to come to the country. They need to come to experience Israel. They need to come and ride in the Negev. They need to come see the Arabai Institute. And I think, you know, that's how you kind of parlay this into more than just them supporting me. And that's happened a couple of times only. But in the future, I think we'll get a few more riders because of that. And but I still really, because I'm not part of the Jewish community, I rely heavily upon Bruce Sharon, who's my writing partner. So if you are not extremely good at fundraising in your community, partner up. Partner up with somebody who's really, really good. Because maybe the first year you won't raise so much, but over time, I think that's what you need to look at. Over time, you'll set a benchmark and then raise money. You know, I don't set a benchmark of 10,000. I'm totally impressed by people who do that. I'm lucky to eke out my fundraising every year, but between the two of us on our team, we do okay. And so I think that's important to think that, you know, get involved in a team, whether it's we're a team of two. We always try to get more than two. I don't think anybody wants to join us. We're kind of quirky.
I think at least one year you had at least a third person on the team.
We did have 3 1 year.
That's what I thought. Thank you. That's great. And one thing I would reiterate, even though I said I'd hold my comments to the end, is the partnering notion. as long as it's okay with a team, we do allow people to partner up by creating a team. And then as long as, the average for the team exceeds what you need per rider, it can be transferred to particular riders to make sure that everybody meets the minimum.
David, just an aside, from a rider's perspective, I think that's really important. That really helps out the first-time riders, and especially the people who don't have a long history of fundraising. That really helps them a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Lori, your strategy in a nutshell.
My strategy in a nutshell. Actually, it's evolving as we speak, because as Chuck was just talking about getting people to come after they've been a supporter for you, I was starting to think about not just riders, but everyone that we talk to about what we do and that we're passionate about. We really have to make it about not just the ride, but about what we're supporting and how we bring that home to our communities here. And so I was thinking about the overlap with my Dana-Farber ride, and there's a guy on my team for that also who's from Jamaica. And I remember when I first met him and I was thinking, you're fundraising for this organization in Boston, and yeah, they have far-reaching research and such that's going on that impacts cancer care across the globe, but especially in this country. And he said, I have no difficulty raising money on my little island in the Caribbean for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, because the research that's happening there is having an impact on care here. And so I, as I was thinking about that while you were talking, Chuck, I'm thinking, we need to be talking about how the work at the Arva Institute and Hazon is impacting on a global, not just in this little country in the Middle East. And how, especially now, and especially given how the global community has been impacted by things in one or two countries, not just in our own, how do we bring it home here? And so it's not just about riders, it's about that person who could be coming to the Arva Institute, for example, because there's some childcare available to them, and maybe they're not riding, and maybe they're not even coming on the Israel ride per se, but they're coming to the Institute to meet with the students and learn about what the work that's done there. And eventually those people come back and maybe they do circle back to riding. So I think this year in particular, I'm thinking about a broader approach than I might have in 2014 or 2018, but I also am part of a team here from our Mandel JCC. And there were people on that team who strongly encouraged me to come, but also encouraged me that I could do the fundraising. And then I had my cross ride friendship with David that's developed over the years. And he encouraged me that I could do both and fundraise for both. And so it becomes every conversation that you have where you talk about both, not one or the other. Even if you split your fundraising year into segments where you raise for one until a certain point and then kick into gear with the other ride or cause that you're working towards, or do you piggyback them? And some people will give to both at the same time because they want to be efficient and they're connected with you at that moment, and other people will wait and spread it out. And the other thing that came up and I was thinking about today is I had someone give me an $18 donation to my PMC ride. They haven't given to my Israel ride yet, but I'm already thinking about how I'm going to be reaching out to her, because she just went to Israel and she was on my high school Israel trip. And I don't know that she's a cyclist. I don't think she is, but she's passionate about Israel and she leads trips there. And so I'm thinking about, how do I have this next conversation with her and other people from my high school Israel trip about this? And just the overlap in different aspects of what we do, and how do we spread the word and circle back to the ride, because part of it's about the ride, but most of it is about this amazing organization and the programming that they do. So
Thank you. And actually, you've perfectly set us up to launch on to the next question, which I'll start with Sharon. But how do you decide who to reach out to? I've heard high school friends, I've heard the dry cleaner and other people's comments, but I'll start with you, Sharon. How do you put together your list?
Well, I start with me. I make the first donation, and I actually have put out for my check to be sent into the Araba. So once I've made my donation, then I will start. I start with family. I go to business associates, next, friends. I mean, yesterday at the 5-borough ride in New York, I was talking to a non-Jewish woman who was riding with me for brain cancer, and she was asking me about it because I had my do-rag on, and she wanted to know what it was all about. She goes, by the time the ride was over, she goes, I'm going to give you a donation. So, I mean, it becomes a conversation with people I ride with people I see. The same way Laura said, I mean, I have my childhood friends from Jewish day school who many of them give at this point. Once you make the connection with the person over the course of time, it grows. And I will point out that though I do have a goal of about $10,000 this year, I started off with 3,600, which was the minimum my first year, and I barely made it. So it's a growing and nurturing and expanding, and keep talking about it.
Thank you. I'll keep going in order. Chuck, how do you decide who to approach?
I think Sharon has my playbook. First I give.
Perfect.
So, put a little skin in the game, make sure that I have something that's committed. I try to tell people, that I try to cover the costs for what I'm doing there, my hotels, things like that. I try to, give enough money to cover that. And then the rest, I'm believing, is so that it goes to the institutes. And they seem to get that, people seem to understand that. Where do I go for that? I've gone a lot of different places. I've done a lot of fundraising with Facebook friends. Not a whole lot on Twitter. Didn't have a whole lot of luck with that. I have a pretty large Twitter group, but not much happening with that. People that I've met, people that are colleagues, people that are friends and family. Once you mention things to them, you try to follow up with them. And do you hit them up every year after year after year after year? I mean, it's the same with any kind of nonprofit funding. You can't expect people to give year after year after year after year. So the base has to be expanded each year, and new people have to be brought on.
That's great. Thank you. Lori, how do you decide who to ask?
Anyone and everyone. Honestly, because no one has ever said to me, why are you asking me? Because I don't start with asking, I start with talking about the organizations or just what I have coming up in my year. And is this a year I'm doing this or I'm doing that? And so it's not really a conversation about will you support this organization or this ride? It's just having a general conversation about what matters to me and what's going on in my life, especially after not having a lot going on in the past couple of years. It's like, I'm looking forward to having fun and riding with people I care about and meeting up with people that I was with in past years and haven't been in a couple of years. And so it starts out with that. And then it becomes, there's a fundraising commitment to this. And I've come a long way from fundraising for my university, making one phone call at a time. How do I decide where to start? It's usually with what's most efficient also. It's who you're seeing face to face, and do you just talk about it regularly? And then Facebook has been big for me. I'm trying to use Instagram a little bit more with my daughter's help. And then I need to get more into doing emailing, which I have not had as much time to put together, and I need to get more efficient with that. And I think that'll help with some more of the core group of people that I fundraised for the ride in the past with. Family is important, but I've honestly found that it can be anyone and everyone. I'll have a coworker here and there, including one who's done the ride. I'll have just people that I wouldn't even think would be interested in donating, and that you don't know what the connection is that's going to be for that person. So just
Very
ask.
helpful. Just ask. It's a great hint. Thank you very much. And Lev, I think you mentioned your insurance agent, the dry cleaner, and others.
Aside from those folks,
How do you decide?
I ask everyone. So I can't really add to the conversation, but other than to say that I also ask people who I don't ask. What do I mean by that? I put a link with a little tagline about the ride in the signature block of my personal email. So anytime I'm emailing anybody, and they're not all personal, sometimes it's work related and acquaintances, but I would guess and say that, I don't know, a couple of $1,000s come in unexpectedly from people who are not necessarily on my list, and that's how my list grows. They see the thing in my signature block, then they ask, what's that about? I tell them, and lo and behold, a gift comes that way too. So passive asking, I'm not really asking them, it's just there. And people do respond to that as well.
That's a really good point. Thank you.
I'm just looking at it now. It says, hey, I'm cycling 365 miles this November. Help me and others advance sustainability and environmental sustainability and peace in the Middle East. That's the tagline and it's got the hyperlink to my fundraising page.
It sounds like it works.
It does. Yeah.
It's wonderful. I'll have to double check because I have a similar link on my personal email signature, and I'm not actually sure if it's ever generated donations, but it's always there. Well, this is great. Thank you very much. Next thing I wanted to discuss, and a few of you already alluded to this, but I'd like to focus in on it. Once someone's donated to your ride, how do you stay connected with them, help them feel appreciated, like they're part of it? Any sort of, tricks you've learned to do that over the years, but also just what's the basic blocking and tackling for that? Chuck, I think you alluded to some of this earlier, but do you mind if I start with you on this?
Sure, that's fine. I think responding to them pretty quickly is important, just to let them know that you've received what they've offered. I guess that's the time when I usually say, hey, why don't you come next year? I don't get a lot of bites back from that, but I want them to think that it's not an unapproachable thing. Yeah, I ride a lot. I do rides. I do kind of race things, and I kind of do things that they don't do. But okay, one anecdotal story is pretty good. There's one guy. He's an extremely big Jewish fundraiser for the hospital. And he is a big time indoor cyclist, just always there. So one time I said, Mike, hey, why don't you come to the Israel ride? And he goes, Chuck, I got to talk to you. I have never been on a bike outside of a gym. I said, seriously? Do you think you can learn to ride? It's like, no, it scares me to death. So, you just don't know who you can talk to, who will be receptive, who could possibly come and ride. I'm hoping that we get some more riders from our neck of the woods, the greater Cooperstown area. That would be nice. But if not, those who give, we thank. I really appreciate them because they're the ones who really do a lot of the lifting for this trip. And I really appreciate them.
Thank you. The story actually reminds me of a friend of ours, actually knew my wife better than me, but knew her through spin classes, and comes up to her one day and says, your husband does that Israel ride thing, doesn't he? Because I'm interested in learning about it. And so my wife connected us with us. I talked to her about it for a few months. She finally signs up and then calls me and says, you need to teach me how to ride a bike. She was a huge spin class person, never rode a bike. Since been on the Israel ride twice and done other bike rides, I think, all over the world. It was transformational, but the surprise was at the beginning, didn't ride a bike. Lori, your thoughts? How do you stay connected once people donate?
I would, if it's on Facebook, that I'm connected to them, I'll immediately respond on Facebook and try to put a personal comment with it. I will send an email. I've been thinking about doing the trees. I've also been thinking about, like with PMC, with names that you ride with, you know, is for some people, even though it's not like connected in the same way to this ride, you know, maybe they would want to know that they are with you as you ride. And David, I know you've done with your Israel flag, right? Haven't you
They're
put names
they're
on that?
behind me on the wall.
Yeah. So, you know, just, you know, do I put them on my Camelback? Do I have a list? Do I do some other something? Or, you know, are there motivational words or things that they've said or that are their tagline to me or to the cause or something that maybe I want to bring with me? So I've been thinking about different ideas of how to apply that with this ride as well. I have not done snail mail, handwritten thank you notes, but have thought about that, particularly if it's perhaps if it's a new donor or if it's someone who's given a considerable amount, I would absolutely do a formal thank you note. But the main thing is sort of the immediacy of the connection. And if it is someone that I speak to with any kind of, even if not every month, but a few times a year, and it's easy enough to pick up the phone and call, I think I would call, because then you're having a conversation about where you're at, either with training or some update about the organization. And then you're really connected with the person as opposed to just sending a quick note.
That's great. Thank you. Lev,
Nothing to add on that topic.
nothing to add. It's short and sweet. And some of it you did mention earlier. Sharon?
The only thing I think that I do differently is that when I'm sending my emails, I give them an update of what I'm doing training wise or any special rides I've done with my own group so that they know what I'm doing. And even if they, like I said before, even if they've given, I keep thanking them. Otherwise, everything else is the same. I mean, you just try and keep the message out there and let them know that you know that they're part of your team. I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And I could add detail to a couple for people listening to a couple of comments that people have made. First off, someone mentioned the trees. What I've done for a number of years, but it actually built off an idea I got from another rider, is after the ride, I tell people this before the ride, but after the ride, each of my donors gets a certificate that a tree was planted in a JNF forest in Israel in their honor. It's turned out to be a wonderful way to say thank you. And I buy them in bulk from Jewish National Fund. After the ride, I send them a list of the donors, what the messages say on each certificate. And it's for me, it's the only thank you note I've ever sent that I get thank you notes for sending it. So it clearly resonates with people. The names, people do this different ways, but the idea behind the names is it gives literal sort of reality to, people always say, their thoughts are with you, or you say, and thank you for the donation, that you'll be with me throughout the ride. But whether it's writing their names on your jersey or keeping them on a piece of paper that's in your Camelback, or as I do, putting them on a flag that you carry with you, in each case, the idea behind that is to convey to your donors that it's more than just a donation. They become part of your ride. So that was just a little bit more detail on that. So next question I had for all of you, each of you has been doing this for a couple of years. The real question is, what advice would you give yourself today as a brand new rider based on what you've learned? So something you would have done totally differently, or just the key essentials that that you'd stick with today. If it's okay with you, Lev, since you were so concise in your last answer, let me start with you on this one. Your today's advice to your younger Lev.
The current Lev is too old to remember from the first time I did the ride. I don't know that I can comment on that. I will mention one other little lever that I've used, which might be relevant. I always write a short bulletin, which my synagogue generally accepts with a photo, and they put it in the, ours is a newsletter that comes out, I guess, once a month, and I do get gifts that way as well. Similarly, I often have a one sheet with a link on it, and when I go to meetings, I just sort of dump those, and people collect them, and every now and then a gift comes that way too. Nothing to advise myself 6 years later. Sorry.
Sounds like your advice 6 years later would be do what I'm doing today. That's not so bad. Thank you.
There you go.
Sharon, other advice for your newbie self?
Don't be afraid to ask, reach wide. And one thing that I learned from somebody else was they made business cards up with their link. And when people are asking about it, they can say, you can talk about it, you say, but this is how you can do it, so that you can tangibly hand somebody something. If they really have an interest, they can toss it or they can use it. But I thought that was a very clever way to put it in someone's mind and put it in their hand and have them take it home. I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to this year.
Great, thank you. Chuck, advice to your newbie self?
Yeah, my newbie self, I liked Lori's idea of the hard copy snail mail. Thank you. Because like, how many have I got this last year? That would be 0. And if somebody sent me one, would I be pretty excited and would I remember it? I would remember it in a heartbeat. And it's something that I think I've done extensively in the past. I've gone to MoMA's website and bought their off sale cards and sent out thank yous for every imaginable thing. And it always got a lot of bang for the buck. And I think that's something that is a reminder to myself today from my previous self. And if I were starting over again, I think that would be for every person who gave to me.
Excellent, thank you. Lori, your advice to your new writer self?
Touching on that same subject of the snail mail actual thank you note, stay caught up and do things as you go along and have an approach and consistent way of an organization for doing what you're doing. But just like when we were getting bar bat mitzvah or graduating or getting married, don't wait until you have like 25 of them to do it once. They'll be much more sincere and varied if you do them gradually. So I have to follow my own advice, which means I have some catching up to do for my PMC ride. But and also just ask and talk about it as much as possible, but not just about the riding component of it. Look for those points of entry that are about the causes, but also about the experience and your connection to Israel. If it is about whatever your faith-based connection is as well, then that can be part of it, but really just about that you're involved in something that you're excited about and you feel a connection to, and that's going to go a long way with your connection with people in general. And that's a big piece of what this is about.
Thank you very much. And Laura, this question I'm going to start with you because I know that the Pan Mass Challenge is also a huge commitment as another bike ride to do. And people often have the question, can you do 2 of these rides at once? For both of them, you have to go back. Many people go back to the same people. Could you talk a little bit about what your experience has been doing 2 charity rides the same? Or not the same, but doing 2 charity rides in the same year, each year?
So the first year that I did both, or the only year that I did both of them fully and in person present, was in 2018. And I was worried about it, but I knew I could stagger the asking, or I could just keep sending things out and talk about both at the same time and why I'm passionate about both of them. I did find there were some people who automatically would give to both. And you just have to be confident in what speaks to you, and that people can decide if they feel more connected or to you and what you're doing and to the cause for one versus the other. They happen to be very different in some ways, and in other ways they're about life and how are we going to continue living and taking care of ourselves and the world that we live in. And so I was intimidated at first to do both. David told me I could do both. And I'm glad you did, because
Thank you.
otherwise I don't know if I would have committed to my second Israel ride that year. But it's really been, I don't know. I feel like each one of these things that you do that isn't just about a race or, an event, and when it has this component to it, it's stressful. It definitely can be stressful, but it's incredibly more meaningful, I find. And so for when people are intimidated by fundraising, I just remind them that, if someone doesn't feel good about the giving or they don't have it to give, they're going to tell you that. If someone feels good about being part of something that you're involved with, they're going to give, and no amount is too small. So just really asking for numbers, but also knowing the people that you're going to be really excited about that $18 donation. I had a $5 donation for my PMC ride from someone who said, that's all I can give. And I said, that's great. It doesn't matter. So just, there's no small amount. They all add up. I don't think I had for either ride. I don't, if you take away my husband and my sister donating in memory of parents, I don't think I've had donations that tend to go higher than like the 150, maybe a few to 250s. But most are anywhere between $25 and $100, and they add up. And so they can add up for 2 rides.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And Sharon, I know this year you are doing at least 2 charity rides. Any comments on juggling fundraising for 2?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, my priorities to the Israel ride, I raise a lot more money for that than I was expected to do for the other ride. But I had the same approach. I gave first, then I started to ask. I didn't ask as wide of a group of people. The group that I rode with, their entire amount they were shooting for was $11,000. We were over $14,000 as of yesterday when we did the ride. So I'll probably make, I think, another post at one point this week, and then I'll be moving over to the Israel ride and concentrating on that. The one thing I will say that none of us have mentioned is when you ask, expect to be asked. I give to a lot of causes that I never given to before because people have supported me, so I support them. So there's a little bit of give and take, and you have to sort of expect that. And when you talk about sort of like thank you, sometimes that's the thank you. When you talk about the PMC, I have supported David before. I only support one PMC rider a year. I've supported other Israel riders. I've told Lori she's the one this year, and she will get the donation at some point. But I
won't hold that against you.
Yeah, I know you won't. But you will get asked. I mean, I do give to Special Olympics. I give to a lot of things. I actually ride for Special Olympics also, but you will get asked. You ask, you will get asked. And that is an expectation that you'll have to manage, and just to be aware of that.
It's a very good point. I've actually had people say to me over the years, gosh, with these rides you do, you must get asked for so many. And on one hand, there's definite truth to that. You're absolutely right. On the other hand, most of the people I know don't do charity rides. So even if it adds up to that, everyone who donates to my ride who also does another charity ride reaches out to me. This is a sort of harsh way to word it, but the charities I'm raising money for come out ahead in that deal. So it does work out, but you're absolutely right that and I don't like using the word reciprocity because I don't think it is, but people that know that you're supportive of these things will reach back out to you for sure. Good. I think we've hit, Lev or Chuck, I don't know if either of you does other charity rides, but if you do, any comments on putting those together?
Yeah, I mostly do profit rides and I do some charity rides, but just by virtue of signing up and not actually fundraising. Fundraising just really is a whole ride. But I want to yield the floor to David because I just have no idea how you do so many overlapping charity rides and keep it all straight, keep your fundraiser, keep your funders all happy. I'm just in awe. So if you could take that question, I would love to hear from you.
Thank you. I'll take it quickly with a little lesson learned that I know I've shared with a couple of you in the past. My first commitment to a charity ride was the Pan Mass Challenge, which is, as Lori mentioned, it's the biggest fundraiser for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. It's also sort of in some sense, the inspirational ride for almost all other charity bike rides. Over the years since it was founded, it's raised, I think at this point, over $750 million. So that was my first commitment. Became passionate about it. And so sort of was already sold on that 2 years later when Howie introduced me to the Israel ride. And I have to say that my first concern when I went to raise money for the Israel ride was I can't cannibalize my PMC fundraising. So I was very careful. I went through my potential donor list. I screened out everybody who already supported the Pan Mass Challenge because I didn't want to sort of go back to that, and asked everybody else. And a week or two later, I was actually at a swim meet for one of my kids, and a friend of ours comes up who does not support the PMC and says, I saw you're doing this bike ride in Israel. If you don't hear from me, send me a reminder. I'd love to support it. I said, great. The person sitting next to me when I had that conversation was one part of a couple that's one of my biggest supporters of the PMC. And she turns to me and says, you're doing a bike ride in Israel? I go, yes. She says, a fundraising ride? I go, yes. And she says, and you didn't include us in your fundraising. And as I'm trying to explain that I thought it was polite, she literally says, I am insulted. It's our decision to make. And that was hugely inspirational to me. She was essentially saying, we're your friends, treat us as adults, include us in these things that are important to you. And if we can't support it or don't want to support it, we'll make that decision. So I took that lesson seriously. And I have, and this is where I think Lori and I do things a little bit differently. I've always separated my PMC fundraising and my Israel Ride fundraising. So I finished the PMC, it's the beginning of August. I send my thank yous to everybody. I wait 2 weeks and then I start, sometimes 3 weeks, and then I start my Israel Ride fundraising. Huge overlap in the lists because I don't take people off the lists, and huge overlap in the donors, but two separate campaigns that once they start, I'm pretty persistent about them. And I have to say, I've been very fortunate over the years, and I think that dominates all else. I have friends who have come to realize for these two charities how important they are to me. And I think year to year, probably 70 to 85% of the people who donated to one of the rides the prior year donate the following year. And probably 70% of my list donates to both. I think one thing that has surprised me and was a good reason I took this lesson from our neighbor, don't pre-guess people. I had a college classmate who had actually never donated the Pan Mass Challenge. A little bit to my surprise, actually, but didn't. I kept them on my list for the Israel ride. They're not Jewish. To the best of my knowledge, it's not someone who feels any connection to Israel. And the first year I rode, they made a very generous donation. I've had other people who don't support one, and I don't always know them well enough to know if the other really speaks to them, but they'll get the fundraising letter for one or the other and literally send a note that says, thank you for doing this. This is a cause that's very important to me. It's nice that I can support it this way. So it's been great. And I should say, some of the charity rides I do, as you said, Chuck, I just sign up and I make the donation. There's a lower minimum and not as big a threshold. And so while I go back to the same group of people every year for 2 very big rides, except for a post on Facebook or 2, they don't get solicited by me for 3 or 4 other rides. So hopefully that helps. I really appreciate all the comments from people. A couple comments I might make to wrap things up, but then I would love, because we will have a couple of minutes, would love to hear questions from people. And I see there's a couple in the chat that I'll try and respond to. First off, to me, and this is important, not just in listening to the 4 panelists today, but past experience, really think about what works for you. How do you communicate with your friends? How do you keep in touch with them? What causes matter to them, and how are you going to connect with them? I think, it was Sharon that said, don't be afraid, just ask. And in the way that you go about asking, for some of us, it's going to be email. For some, it's going to be a phone call. For some, it's going to be getting together for coffee. But the key is to sort of get over that first hurdle and ask. And when you ask, and I feel like I heard this really strongly from a couple of you today, share a bit of yourself. Why is this cause important to me? Whether it's Dana-Farber, where it's, cancer is a big deal, or Israel, where the environment and peace building is a big deal. Those are things that resonate really strongly to me. I'm totally happy sharing with my friends and potential donors why they matter. And Chuck, I thought you worded it really nicely today when you talked about how, especially it sounds like as you've gotten to know the Institute, you come back with a perspective that you can share with people on how this work is really changing the region. It doesn't have to be a 20-minute or hour-long conversation, but getting the words across to your friends on why this is important to you, I think matters. I heard variations from each of you about being persistent. So it's not just ask and then forget about it, but it's keep in touch with people, send an update, send a refresher. I know in my experience, I've never sent a sort of refresher email that repeated the ask without it generating additional donations. And I gather from talking to other people, that's true as well. So some persistence matters. And to the degree that you can, be as inclusive as possible. Ev, I really liked your opening with, the dry cleaner, the insurance agent, everybody else, the signature block. None of that's screening people out. I know that for some people, me being in the investments business, there's people that there's issues I can't ask, so I don't. So don't break any rules of your profession. But to the degree that you deal with someone, you can get to know them. Don't be shy about including them. And then something I heard really strongly from each of you is thanking people and thank them repeatedly, include them. I think each of the 4 of you mentioned get that first thank you out quickly. Each of you in one way or another mentioned something about then as you keep in touch, continue to keep in touch with them. It's not just that they've donated and now you're finished with them, but you'd like them actually to still be included as you go along. And then I think a couple of you mentioned, sending them updates on the ride, some of the different things we talked about how you leave people feeling included while you're on the ride, whether it's my flag or other people's daily updates or things like that. But, whether it's $5 or $500, people have given something of themselves to be a part of you being part of this event. And what I've heard tonight from each of you, and feel like I've heard over the years, is give back to them in a way that shows that it really did matter to you. They were a part of the event. A couple people mentioned the teams. I think that's a really valuable thing to keep in mind, is that if you're doing this with somebody else, you can share the fundraising responsibility. If that's just something that makes them feel more comfortable the first time, that's great. If it's something that actually over time is important to both of you, that works just as well. But don't forget about that. And then finally, I should mention, it hasn't been the core focus tonight, but it will be in the program we're doing next week. The Israel Ride provides a few tools, whether you use just the most basic of setting up your fundraising page so that there's an electronic way that people can contribute to you, or you use some of the other tools. They can be really valuable in making it easier for you, making it easier for your donors. And this is my brazen plug for next week. Join us and learn more about those tools for sure. Couple of questions I saw in the chat. I think, Judy, you asked about the cost of the ride relative to the fundraising. We're still in the process of figuring out what will be the final accounting for this year, and all costs in Israel continue to go up, so it's not going to get lower. But in recent years, our experience is that about half of the income from each rider goes to underwriting the actual cost of the ride. So if that's about half, it would mean a decent chunk of it is covered by your registration fee, and then a piece of your fundraising, and then the balance goes to our beneficiaries. We'd love to keep that lower than half, but the truth is, at half, it's reasonable to the charities that we support. It's reasonable from the perspective of, like, Charity Navigator and things like that. Both the Institute and Hazon get very good scores from Charity Navigator. So that's about what it is. And consistent with that, we do have riders. Chuck, you mentioned it tonight. I know Howie, it's been a strategy for him over the years, where their contribution covers about that, and then they focus on broader fundraising beyond that, so that they can very directly say to their supporters, me and my family, we've made a contribution that covers the cost of this. So what you're doing is pure supporting the impact of it. I think those are key things. Howie, since you're here, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, just first of all, thank you to everybody. Thank you for your support for the ride. Thank you for all your fundraising efforts. Fundraising is about you as much as in your relationships and what you build. The only thing that I'd maybe add or emphasize from what was said before is, personally, I always personalize all my emails in one form or another, and not just the making sure I say Dear Laurie or Dear Sharon, but with some sort of sentence just to sort of help on that side. And the other thing I would say is just not only don't be afraid to ask, but ask and ask again and ask again. If somebody doesn't want to give, they won't give. And we know we're all inundated with emails all the time. And lots of times people intend to do something and it gets lost in the shuffle. So just keep asking.
I think the old line is ask early, ask often. And it's certainly the experience of people we ask. I know it's mine. As I said, after my initial fundraising email, I'll send refreshers, usually every 2 to 3 weeks. And yes, absolutely, they always generate additional donations. And keep in mind, that story I told you from around the pool. What did the person who sprung my secret say? If you don't get a donation, send me a reminder. So they were actually acknowledging I need to be encouraged along, because people get way too many emails. If they don't respond and donate today, their intentions could all be wonderful, but it's the email reminder they get in 2 weeks that's going to spur the gift. David Barash?
I also would like to thank all of you for these wonderful suggestions. It's fabulous, and it gives me a lot of tools to incorporate as well. And one other thing I would suggest is to reach out in different ways. We talked a lot about email. We talked about making a phone call, but even a text, because some people will respond differently to different mediums. If you get a text and you put a link in, that might be the trigger that will work to help them to respond, because it's immediate, it's right on their phone, and then and they could just click on the link or something. So reach out in different ways, not just follow up email, but try a text, try a phone call, and sometimes those will help as well in different ways.
Excellent point. I think we each have different ways we communicate with our friends, and then some ways that might be unique to a particular friendship. And keep that in mind for this, because you're building on the existing relationship you have. Thank you to everybody who's been here. I really, really appreciate it. I especially appreciate the panelists who not only gave of their time tonight and give of their time every time they do the Israel ride, but also gave of their time to think about tonight. We had a couple of pre-calls with some of you before tonight, and I know that all of your time is valuable, so I really appreciate that. And with that, I think we're about at our hour, so thank you, everybody. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out anytime to Sarah. If she or Ilana can't answer it, she shares those emails very quickly with the rest of us. Actually, even when they can answer it, they're nice about sharing those emails with the rest of the leadership. So we'll be sure to get back to you. And like I said, please don't be shy. Join us for next week to get a little bit more insight to the tools that we make available to help with the fundraising.
A few
Thank you.
closing remarks from me.
Go, Sarah.
Because I'm a narcissist. I just wanted to remind folks, first of all, thank you again to our amazing panelists. I shared in the chat, we also have additional fundraising resources on our website. I'll make sure to send that link in our follow-up email. For those of you that had to join us a bit late, this has been recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel as soon as I finish uploading and editing it. And for upcoming events, we have a Yom Ha'atzmaut happy hour this Thursday, May 5th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. For those of you that happen to be in the area, we have an info session in Flemington, New Jersey. That is also on our website. The great David Eisenberg will be there in person. And like David mentioned, we have another Fundraising 101 session that's going to be focused more on the tech side of things. So how to update and customize and utilize your fundraising page best. That's going to be on May 11th, which is Wednesday, also at 8 p.m. Eastern. And some of you may have seen, we're starting to get ready for Israel Ride Across America Part 2. Some of you participated last year. We basically set up a bunch of rides across the states, and we had everyone ride on the same day, and it was really, really cool. If you're interested in leading, co-leading, or participating in a ride in your area, then please reach out to me. If you have not filled out your forms in Explority, please do so, or I will email you really nicely, but I'll email you a lot. And that is all from me. Thank you all so much again for joining, and looking forward to seeing you at our Yom Ha'atzmaut happy hour on Thursday.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.